The other night, I was out with organizer and friend of the channel, Kid Notkin, when we got in a pretty heated argument. It's not a new one to anybody who's been on the ground at any semblance of action or protest. We were on the side being criticized. If you're unaware, Kid and I started OperationInflation.com, where you can sponsor a costume for a protester on the front lines here in Portland and actually elsewhere. Well, some claim that we are ineffective and useless. What we do has no impact materially. It might shock them to learn others actually take us to task for not being peaceful enough, that we have too much impact, that our rhetoric doesn't demand peaceful action enough, and might even do the opposite. Our answer is the same for both sides. You need to stop asking if protests need to be peaceful or violence. That's it. The question itself, the dichotomy, is the trap. And it's a trap because it accepts this false dichotomy engineered by power. The idea that resistance must declare itself either morally pure and above the fray, and therefore fucking ineffective, or morally compromised, willing to get dirty and violent, and thus illegitimate. This binary, it doesn't describe reality. It conditions it, shapes it, forcing resistance into pre-authorized categories that neutralize the threat before the first poster board gets a witty slogan written on it. This demand that you declare yourself peaceful is itself an act of domination. It makes you responsible for managing the state's violence against you with grace. It turns resistance into performance art for liberal audiences who want to change without disrupting things. They want justice without discomfort, revolution that you can watch comfortably from your chair or couch on your phone. And there's value here. I mean, I won't say otherwise, unless you think most of this country aren't libs. I mean, come the fuck on. But here's what people don't really tell you. The most effective protests in history refused this dichotomy entirely. They don't promise peace. They don't promise violence. They protested and let the conditions determine the form, not through wishy-washy centrism. And instead, a strategic clarity about what resistance actually requires, the full range of tactical potentials deployed according to what the moment demands, rather than what makes you comfortable or observers feel good about themselves. The peaceful, violent binary itself is actually symbolic violence in basically its purest form. It forces you to choose between these prepackaged identities while erasing the real question. What disrupts the system's violence effectively? We white people, we've spent decades neutering resistance by turning Martin Luther King Jr. into this peaceful saint who's lived above the fray, an idealist, and other bullshit things across the board, forgetting that this man was a strategist above all. We made Gandhi into a moral exemplar, forgotten he was operating under an atmospheric threat of more militant alternatives. We've confused not celebrating violence with preemptively surrendering all capacity to disrupt. And God damn it, MLK knew this. MLK did not promise peace. That never happened. He warned of its absence. His April 1967 Riverside Church speech, the one that got him denounced by the New York Times, amongst others, it didn't offer nonviolence as moral posturing. It described nonviolence as a strategic intervention in a system already structurally violent, already killing through economic starvation and imperial wars.
It is as necessary for me to be as vigorous in condemning the conditions which cause persons to feel that they must engage in riotous activities as it is for me to condemn riots. And so, in a real sense, our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. And as long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots over and over again. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention.
The revisionist king that we see says, be peaceful because it's morally superior. The actual king, he said, be nonviolent, because if you force the system to respond with overt violence to peaceful bodies, you expose the violence that's already there. His protests in Birmingham, they worked not because black protesters were morally pure, but because Bull Connor's dogs and fire hoses made visible the terror already operational, but invisible. Crucially, King never told the state or the white moderates that there would be no violence. He told them there would be his nonviolence or there would be Brother Malcolm's rifles. There would be the Panthers' armed patrols, the uncontained rage of Watts and Detroit. This threat was not a bluff. It was atmospheric pressure. King's power derived not from a moral superiority, but from being the preferable alternative to alternatives that terrify power. And in that Riverside speech, King uttered words we must never forget about a choice that we still have today. Nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. Somehow we memory hold this. When we tell contemporary protesters to be like MLK, we're invoking our own sanitized mythology. This guy who didn't exist, who probably wouldn't recognize these neutered protests we now celebrate in his name. Gandhi was not different. What happened wasn't either. Hell, none of these peaceful sages of history ever are. Let's go way back. How about Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching? It contains one of history's clearest statements against celebrating violence. Weapons are not auspicious tools. Some things are simply bad. But note what this passage doesn't say at any point. It doesn't say, so never use weapons. It actually continues. When you kill another, honor him with your tears. When the battle is won, treat it as a wake. See, a good person doesn't revel in harm, doesn't fetishize a gun, doesn't make violence his identity. But when the text says the sage uses them only when he cannot do otherwise, well, it's acknowledging a fact. Sometimes you can't do otherwise. And we've conflated not celebrating violence with never enacting it, as if the only way to avoid becoming what we fight is to never fight at all. But even the Tao, it doesn't counsel passivity. It counsels wu wei, action through non-action, an intervention with minimum force to redirect the way things are going, responding to the situation as it is, not as you idealistically wish it were. My favorite line of this passage, devastating in its simplicity. Victory is not beautiful. And it's not. I want no one dead. I want a system that makes death somehow feel meaningful, dismantled. Because we wade through death as a matter of course with a wondrous capacity to ignore it, to ignore this violence that is baked into our lives. The moments of violence we see that become part of that 24-hour news cycle or the excuse for whatever the next set of overreaching bullshit regulations, these things appear irrational, but only because we've made systemic violence itself natural. We see the self-driving cars burning, right? We call that violence of the protesters. We don't see the supply chain that exploits the world's most poor to mine the shit needed for those fucking cars, that pollutes their worlds, gives them cancers, children doing this, 5-year-olds who die young in these mines.
He has no idea how to read or write, but he is an expert in washing cobalt. My parents are dead.
When we do see these things, we say they're victims of economics, not violence. And that sleight of hand, that's the same one that neuters resistance. You see, when they are demanding protests remain peaceful, they're demanding they remain subjectively nonviolent, while the systems being protested continue being systematically violent. They want their operations uninterrupted. We're asking the dominated to unilaterally disarm while the dominators maintain full arsenals, not just of guns, but of the actual capacity to harm. The violence of blocking a highway pales in comparison to the violence of packing thousands of humans in concentration camps with record death rates due to their fucking race. But somehow we're only trained to see the violent protesters, the former, so much so that Republicans cheer when cars plow through them, right? Fox News ran a compilation video a little bit back, it's back on their website, of protesters being hit by cars with the music, "Move bitch, get out the way." Forget fucking death squads, secret police, black sites that disappear people, dozens killed by ICE, just last year alone. You sit in traffic, that's real violence. This thing is why, should protest be peaceful or violent, is already contaminated. It accepts the frame where protesters are the agents of potential violence rather than the systems they're part of. So what do? Well, I can tell you this. You don't do John Wick. It would feel good, you think, but you don't. Instead, you do Pig. Nicolas Cage's movie, see, his character demolishes his enemy at the end of it, not through fists, but with empathy. It's one of my favorite scenes. He cooks his enemy, this seeming enemy, a meal that resurrects this man's abandoned dreams and fears and sadness and trauma. It forces him to confront this gap between his authentic self and his performed identity. This is violence, symbolic violence, but it operates through a recognition of his humanity rather than a negation of it. I've been calling it the terror of love. So what does the terror of love mean when it's political resistance? It means making their narratives impossible, breaking that fragile structure with something deeper. When they need to call you terrorist to maintain their story, force them to label an inflatable Frogger unicorn as the existential threat. Make them declare a potluck a national security crisis. Put them in the position where maintaining their framework requires saying something so absurd the framework collapses under its own ludicrous ridiculousness. Make them go on national TV and explain why grandmother's knitting constitutes a terror cell. Make them deploy riot police against someone reading poetry. Make them argue in court that chalk drawings threaten Western civilization. Force them to name their absurdity and that violence by being so specifically, weirdly, undeniable, non-threatening that any response looks like naked aggression. This works because it's collapsing symbolic violence into actual violence, using it against the narrative machinery itself. You're not fighting their story. That doesn't work. You're making their story incoherent. You're introducing elements so incompatible with their binaries that the binaries break. And when you're doing this, it is terrifying. You will write a loved one's phone number in your underwear, just in case of the worst. In the best case, you'll spend days having a lot of trouble breathing and maybe have to get rid of some clothes. The same people who cheered for those cars hitting protesters, they'll turn around and suddenly say that hitting someone with the car, or even not hitting them with the car, just aiming it or driving it, is actually defensible self-defense murder. The same people who cheered on Rittenhouse say now that having a loaded gun at a protest is a death sentence. It's incredible. And playing in this space is the more difficult path, because I call it terror of love because it means treating your enemy as fully human, holding them fully accountable, refusing the symbolic violence they put on you, dehumanizing them in return. CEOs are monsters, ICE are monsters, blah, blah. Refusing this false equivalence of both sides at the same time. It means saying to them, I see you. I understand the systemic pressures that shaped you, and I will not stop until this system that shaped you into a human-shaped sack of shit is dismantled. And it's way harder than pacifism. It's way harder than militancy. Pacifism lets you feel pure and good. Militancy lets you feel powerful and good. Terror of love, it requires remaining in the contradiction. I don't want you dead, but I will not cooperate with your system's violence. And because of that, the most revolutionary thing we can do is refuse to promise peace. No, not by promising violence. That gives the state the thing they want to justify easy crackdown. Just refuse to promise. When asked, will your protest be peaceful? The answer should be our protest will be whatever the fuck it is. The violence is here. We're responding to that. This strategic ambiguity, it preserves the possibility space. It keeps power guessing. And god damn it, power really hates to fucking guess. Power wants to know. Fascists want to know, define everything. You're going to see it in response in the comments here, certainly, as people tell you I'm either a pussy pacifist or I'm inciting violence. They're too ensconced in their own bullshit. It's the way it works. And yeah, does this risk actual violence? Of course. Violence is already there, killing people though. Israel is committing genocide. Healthcare system at large is killing tens of thousands. Fossil fuel extraction is killing everybody. ICE had more deaths last year than in its entire history. We've had so far 6 this year in the last couple weeks. This is mid-January. It's on track to break the record of that. Fucking crazy. ICE has twice the number of people in detention on any given day than it did a year ago. And if we're only including those with no criminal record, it's a 25x increase year on year. Those of us who protest, and some, and not me, some are there every fucking day. We now know we can be killed with impunity. There will be no justice for the people ICE kills. Don't expect that. No one should or does. Justice of that order is dead. And yes, somehow, in the face of all of this, there's a demand for peaceful protests and everything. We've been handicapping ourselves by making peace into a fetish rather than treating nonviolence as the strategy that it used to be. And we can do it again. How? Well, practically easy. First, stop asking permission. Stop performing innocence for audiences that will criminalize you anyway. There's no form of effective resistance power approves of. That's how it operates. Second, organize for escalation capacity, not purity. Build structures and things that can choose their level of disruption based on what the moment requires. Have a good legal team ready. Have medics ready. Those black blockers, you're going to fucking need them. Those weekend protesters there because they had a day off and came down? Yeah, you need them too. You want to know my favorite reason the inflatable costumes worked? I got a bunch, but before them, the rhetoric was that Portland was burning, that the ICE facility was the subject of riots nightly. The day after the costumes hit the pavement, people came down, older women, older men, families, people in wheelchairs, young people, kids, because it broke that illusion. It made them realize there wasn't danger there. It made them feel like they could fucking protest. It made them realize the power that they have as a person. Do that. Third, attack the legitimacy of the system, not just policies. Symbolic violence works by disrupting meaningful structures. When you disrupt, don't apologize. It's the difference between saying reform the police and saying that police themselves are the armed enforcement wing of private property. The first accepts the frame that policing itself is legitimate, but flawed and troublesome. The second attacks the conceptual apparatus that makes police seem like a natural feature of human society rather than a really specific and recent contingent historical technology of control. Every euphemism you refuse is an act of symbolic violence against their meaning structures. Every time you name the thing they've trained us not to name, you're attacking legitimacy. Make people realize that what they're actually defending is indefensible. And you don't do that through fucking debate. Fourth, refuse false binaries. You don't have to choose between peaceful protest and revolutionary violence. You can choose strategic disruption, escalating pressure that begins with negotiation, but reserves the right to escalate. That's the game they're playing. Fifth, recognize that the system wants you violent in really specific ways. Ways that justify crackdown, that alienate allies or potential allies. But it also wants you so nonviolent that you're irrelevant. The sweet spot is in the space they can't accommodate. Disruptive enough to matter, strategic enough to build, symbolic enough to reframe the terrain. So no, we shouldn't want peaceful protests. We shouldn't want violent protests. We should want effective protests. And stop pretending we know in advance what effective fucking means. The good person, Lao Tzu's sage, doesn't celebrate violence. Neither do they fetishize its absence. They respond to conditions as they find them. So let the fucking chips fall as they may. Organize for capacity, build for escalation, refuse their frame. And when they turn to you and they ask, are you going to be peaceful? Tell them the truth. Tell them you're going to be fucking appropriate.